Hey there, my empty nest friends. There are so many possibilities in our empty nest life to consider: downsizing, moving, second careers, maybe even retirement. But here's something I learned that just might pique your interest if you've ever thought, hey, I have an idea for a business. Right now, there's a surge in Americans aged 55 to 64 leading the way in entrepreneurship, making up nearly a quarter of all new startups. Today, I'm joined in studio by Jack Calhoun, founder of Encore Career Lab. And after selling his successful wealth management firm, Jack faced his own what now moment. And from that experience, he created a powerful framework to help others craft a meaningful, impactful, and fulfilling second acts. And we're going to get into it right now. Jack, welcome to this emptiness life.
Jay, thank you so much. I appreciate your invitation, and I love the work that you're doing here. So it's a privilege to be here with you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited. Like the idea of encore career. Like I love the phrase encore career. It's just like
Yeah.
perfect. And get
Oh,
people thinking like, oh yeah,
well,
that I could have a second thing here. But you sold a business that was thriving, and then you ended up asking yourself, what now? So
yeah.
take us through that. Like, how did you end up from there to Encore Career Lab?
Well, impulsively.
Impu-
I,
All
I,
good decisions are
uh,
impulsive. I heard.
the classic ADD creative type, and I backed into the investment industry. My dad was in it. He had a small firm. He had been a stockbroker, and he didn't like the commission pressure, so he went independent and just took some of his clients with him. And around the late 80s, early 90s. And I was off in liberal arts land. I was a journalism major and it was in sports marketing, but I was getting the itch to do something on my own. I also realized I was far too ADD to ever work for anybody else. So I went to work with dad, who was just like me, except even more so. And so we were a dangerous combination. Lots of ideas, not always a lot of execution. But we found some people who were great for executing and implementing, and we grew and we did well. And I learned the business along the way. And one of the things that probably contributed to some imposter syndrome on my part was being a creative in a very analytical industry. And in hindsight, I now realized that was a real advantage for me because there are a dime a dozen analytical types in the industry, but not many people that can communicate. And it's one of those things you appreciate in the rearview mirror, right?
Exactly. I see some parallels here because I was the same way. I was a chief information officer in schools, again, but creative,
Yeah.
not like
Yeah.
I learned the tech stuff because I needed to be able to talk. I needed to find people
Right.
who could do the tech stuff so I didn't have to worry about it. But you're right. There is something there
Yeah.
in terms of how do we make this work? And I think I should probably reintroduce this episode as Welcome to This ADD Life because I sit in that same circle as you.
Yeah. Well, there's a big market for that too. So maybe
Yeah.
you and I can join up on one of those. But
There you go.
um,
Yeah,
so
tell me about the Encore career and what is that
yeah,
exactly? What does it look like?
yeah. So I ended up buying the company from dad, and then ended up selling the company, and there was a lot of M&A and consolidation and wealth management about 10 years ago, and I didn't really see it coming. It was the offers started coming to us, and that's when I was like, oh, well, I'm almost 50, or maybe I was 50, and I thought, well, I've done this for 25 years or whatever, and it's been fun, and we've done good work. I didn't wake up every day when I was 8 wanting to be a registered investment advisor, and I
That's
thought,
not on a dream chart of
it wasn't
8-year-old.
on my dream chart, and so I felt like I had done that, and I was ready for a new challenge. And I thought, well, I'll take some chips off the table and I'll reinvent myself. And I'm a creative guy, and this will be fun. And I was really not, I was really naive because having been in wealth management, I knew a lot about retirement planning and all of those things that go into a sound retirement. What I realize now is the industry is really missing a big holistic view of this experience, right?
Oh,
It's
spot on. Yeah.
very obsessed with solving for X, right? You have Y amount of money, you have, you know, X amount of years, you have Z amount of assets. Does this formula work? And if it does, go forth and party down. And if it doesn't, keep working. And that's the view. And so I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I've got money or whatever you want to call it, and now I can go do something fun and reinvent myself. What I uh, understood or didn't value properly is how much of our identity gets wrapped up in our work. And I think with the empty nest thing, it's very much your work for a lot of us is parenting too. And when that goes away, there is this sort of existential crisis for a lot of people, particularly if you were really invested in what you did. And if that became, and this is like I say, one of my clients is a recently retired OBGYN. And he didn't say, I help people have babies. He said, I'm an OBGYN.
Mhm.
And say,
Oh,
I
yeah.
help people with investing. I said, I'm an investment advisor, right? I am what I do. And if someone's a full-time parent, you might say, I'm a full-time mom or dad or stay-at-home mom or dad. And that's what you, and so then that goes away. And then there's just this sort of vacuum, I think. And I know you've touched on this repeatedly in your episodes and with your guests, but it's real. And I think for my case, people who were very invested in their careers, it is this sense that who am I without this thing I did, right? And I didn't see it coming, I guess, because I didn't think I wasn't this super type A guy working 80 hours a week, sacrificing everything for the sake of the company or whatever. I had a pretty balanced life and really I considered parenting and being a good father and husband to be my top value and priority. And work was a big part of that because of the other family stuff. And so I thought I was pretty balanced. And when it went away, I thought, I'll just reapply this to a different area. And it was really hard. And one of the things that I realized is when you can do anything, how do you define what anything is? Right.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, and it's this called the paradox of choice, right? It's like we have too many. And I was my wife, Nancy, told me to go get some toothpaste at the grocery store a few weeks ago, in addition to other things. And so I'm on the toothpaste aisle, and there's like 50 varieties of the same 3 brands of toothpaste. I'm like, I just want the toothpaste, man. And it was overwhelming. I just stared at this wall of toothpaste for 3 minutes until finally I just grabbed something and kept going, and that's a metaphor for what we face when we leave our career behind. It's well, we've gotta actually start defining things, and in some cases, I think closing some doors so that we don't have
Ye
this overwhelm, and we start to get a sense of confidence that here are some directions that resonate with me and that potentially resonate with people that would wanna work with me, and let me pursue those because I feel good about those. And so the purpose of the program, Encore Career Lab, is really to help people gain that sense of confidence that they're headed off in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that, and you touched on, like, the idea of choice and that the way you framed it, like, I call that the Baskin& and Robbins syndrome. There's 31
Yes.
flavors, like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I
Yes.
think that best describes how empty nesters look at this next stage. It's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, there are so many choices. I choose to do nothing, or I just choose to wait to be involved in my kid's life, wait for the engagement and the wedding and the grandkids rather than saying, "Oh, how do I seize an opportunity here in my
Right.
second life?" In wealth management, you're looking at retirement, and I'm looking at, hey, how do you maximize your life between the time the kids launch and retirement? But
Right.
I think you talk a little bit about, ooh, when we get to this point, we hit this thing. I think you call it the drift,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
That leads us to into I'm just floating.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, and how do people when they come to you for the Encore career, when they come to you, like, how do you help them through the drift to get them, like, headed in a direction where they actually have a rudder?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and I think the phrase that I've used is the wondering and wandering phase,
Mm,
which is basically what the drift is, and it's let's be honest, this is a first world problem, right? We're blessed to have this problem and food and shelter taken care of, and we have some means, and so in a sense, what a blessing, right? But also, it's still real and it's still overwhelming and paralyzing. And so I think it's important that we look at finding things that feel like they are aligned with who we are, how we like to work, what we feel like we have to offer, and things that feel purposeful to us. And people get obsessed about finding their purpose. But Chip Conley, who founded Modern Elder Academy, had a great phrase that I loved. He's, let's work on doing things that are purposeful, and then purpose will follow from that, right?
Love that.
And so I didn't feel a lot of purpose from sound investment principles when I was in college, but 20 years later, I felt a lot because I'd invested myself in it, right? And I felt there was a right way and a wrong way to go about it. And so, but that came over time. And so I think when we get to this phase, there's so much emphasis on finding our purpose that we don't know maybe what our purpose is, right? And parenting might have been a purpose for us, probably was, and career. And when those go away, it's, well, I got to find my purpose before I can get going. And actually, I think it's the opposite. I think we get going on some smart, relatively low friction, low risk directions and try stuff and have some fun with it and just take all this perfectionism pressure off of it. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think too, like people who are listening, like, oh, I don't even know how to get started on you talk about purpose. No, my
Yep.
purpose was my kids. I
Yep.
can't imagine another type of purpose.
Right.
But through assistance and help and somebody kind of showing you multiple ways that that could happen, well, let's take a look at it. So, could you give us an example? Let's put this into like practical terms for folks
Mhm.
of someone who went through your program and discovered a new purpose, and maybe what was one of their biggest breakthroughs in doing that?
Yeah. I think that's interesting. One of my clients is a CIO, former CIO for a big manufacturing company in the upper Midwest. And he was early retired, as I call it. It's the proverbial offer you can't refuse, right? And this is the
Mhm.
way that big corporations do these things, right? You may not get this package again. If I were you, I'd take it, but you do what you want. And it was one of those. And so he wasn't mentally ready for that. He was early 60s and he felt he'd been there since he was out of college, right? So this was his identity. And he was, there was he was embittered a bit when we started working together. And I get that. There's a grieving that goes to it when it's not on your terms.
Mhm.
But we worked through that over some time. Well, one of the things that he's done is taking up distance running, and he didn't start until he was 60 years old. Now he's like 65. And he's now preparing to run the Chicago Marathon. I think it's his ninth or 10th marathon that he will have run. And he didn't start until he was 60 years old. There are other younger runners coming to him asking for help, asking how he's doing it. He's got this Yoda stoicism when he goes about this running that is appealing. And so we're working with him on potentially being this running coach is something you can do online, right? You can
Oh,
do it in person.
absolutely.
A lot of ways to do it. And it's gratifying and it's potentially lucrative to him. So that's one path that we're working on. But there's also the path of what he did in his career, and people are coming to him asking him for help with consulting. And this is really this distinction. David Brooks, the writer, has made it. It's career adjacent and non-career adjacent for your encore career, which means doing stuff a different variation of what I did before, but more on my terms,
Okay.
or something completely different. What I find is that high achievers, people who are career invested, our logical brain says, I've got all of this experience. I should probably just do something that's related to what I've done, right? I get it. On the other hand, our heart a lot of times isn't still in it and we're burned out on it. But in my case, writing was one of my fortes in the investment business, right? I was good at kind of John Bogle, plain talk investing stuff. And I knew I could teach that to other advisors who probably weren't, it didn't come as naturally to them. That could probably be a lucrative encore career. And I started down that path, and then I was so sick of writing about the top just was like, I don't want to do it. So I think, and I have a dentist in the program, same thing. He was very successful, really an entrepreneur disguised as a dentist. And he wants to keep going with something. And he started thinking about consulting with younger dentists that are behind the timeline where he was. But then I've found that he keeps talking about it. It sounds like work when he talks about it. And I'm like, well, we got to figure this out, because what I do know at this point in life is if our heart isn't in it, we will not see it through. We might get intrigued by it. We might start down that path, and then we'll get stuck if it's in conflict with our values. And so I think it's really important to get clear on the why and before we get into the what and the how.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, touching a little bit into Simon Sinek's work there.
Very much so.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that you bring it like, that was me, like, when I left my previous career, known nationally in independent schools and tech leaders, and was the chair of the board of our professional association right before I pivoted, and I left, like, people were like, "You're gonna crush it as a leadership coach for people who are tech folks," and I was like, I tried, and I was like, my heart wasn't in it. Do I
Yeah.
believe in leadership? Absolutely, 100%. I'm not saying I don't. But I knew I wanted to have a bigger impact, right? And
Right.
so it's tied to purpose, and that's where I ended up with this and maybe a couple other things that I'm working on. But it's also, ooh, when you leave an entire community and identity behind, it does rock your world a little bit.
It does. It does. Because it's your comfort zone, right? And you know
Mhm.
the people and you know the players, the landscape. It's literally comfortable to you.
Yeah.
And when we push outside of that, it triggers a lot of fear and imposter syndrome and things like that. One of my current clients is a very high ranking military member who's just retired, been in the Pentagon and commanding forces overseas. And it's the same kind of thing. It's even at that level where you'd think that person could write their own ticket, and really they can, but it's still a completely, civilian life is something he hasn't experienced in 30 years.
Sure. It looks different.
So, it does. It comes for everybody, but I also think that's where a lot of the really fertile ground is. Think about reinvention and doing stuff that, maybe it's tied into stuff we loved when we were a kid, but it's a more grown up variation of that, right?
Yeah.
So our program is really, we start with the why, we try to surface a lot of things. We're really focused on helping people get in touch with the wisdom that they've acquired. I call it their wisdom fingerprint. We all have our unique kind of amalgamation of experience and perspective and natural gifts and talents that creates our sort of unique wisdom brand, if you want to call it that, right? Nobody has the same amalgamation as anybody else. And there are other people that really can benefit from that. And this is an age where, the cerebral energy, the fluid intelligence, if y'all have ever gotten into that high synapse firing stuff that we had in our 20s and 30s is declining at this age. It's that cerebral energy that we had when we were younger. But what we have in droves now is this wisdom, this crystallized intelligence, perspective and judgment and, the wisdom of the elders. So it's really what we're about is trying to help people surface what they've got to work with, where their passions are, where their capabilities are, the people that they think that they would like to work with. And then we get more into the what, and then we get into the how. And let's take this in a logical progression as opposed to just trying stuff and getting stuck, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much what my recipe was when I sold my company.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The who before the how is so important.
Yes.
Right? Yeah,
Yes.
and the why fits into there in advance of that, but if you don't know who you wanna be or what you want things to look like for yourself, then it makes it really difficult to kinda even take that next step.
It does because our values in our we spend a lot of time on non-negotiables because we didn't have that luxury when we were young. We didn't
True.
get to decide who we were gonna work with all the time and how and where and when, and parenting too. And so now we do. We have 2 things that we would have really dearly loved to have had more of when we were younger, which is agency and autonomy. And that's the ability to decide what we want to do and the capability to make it happen. And so we need to find things that are going to align with our values and our non-negotiables, because we won't put up with the crap, excuse my French, like we did back when we were younger, because we don't have to. And so I think that's what's important, is to get clarity about that ahead of time so we don't spin our wheels and stuff that ultimately is just not going to be the right direction for us.
Yeah. What's like the very first question you have people answer when they come to you?
Uh, Well, do they have a sense of clarity about where they think they're going? If they do, then we spend some time on that, and it helps me understand what their thinking is. Most of the time, it's cloudy, and so I think what we try to do is to help realize that that's not atypical. People, one of the things I find is this age, and I had it happen with me, is we're at an age where we feel like we're supposed to have it all figured out, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah, 100%.
if we're empty nesters, presumably we launched some children somewhere in the world, and we are either at the top of our careers or we exited at the top of our careers, however we define that. And so there's this sense that, I should have this figured out, right? I tell my kids I do. And so when we get stuck and we can't figure out where to go next, there's this kind of sense like, oh my gosh, it's me, insecurities surface. And what I find is that people tend to go internal. We get in our heads. We want to get it figured out. We don't want to worry people that we're stuck, that we care about, and it's a little embarrassing to us. And so we just start reading and we start consuming, and we get all locked up in our head. And that is a sure recipe for analysis paralysis. And so I think the first thing I try to reassure people is it's not you, it's this phase of life. And genealogically, we're really the first generation that's grappling with this, right? If you think
True,
about your
true.
grandparents, even 30, 40 years ago, and really even our parents, and that wasn't a thing. They weren't thinking about a thriving third act, right?
No.
They were thinking about martinis and Viceroy cigarettes like my grandparents were. Um,
Yeah, cocktail hour.
Not coincidentally, they didn't live that long. And so now we do. We expect to have years and really decades left. If you hit 60, you have a 50-50 shot of seeing 90. And you have a life expectancy of about 85, and it's just going to get longer as technology improves, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Some of
Um,
the people forecasting it out, like my kids' ages could live to be like 110 or
100 plus,
120. Yeah.
right? And so that's completely different perspective than anybody had 30 or 40 years ago. And even if they wanted to do stuff that was productive, they were very limited what they could do, because this thing we're doing here didn't exist, right? There was no way to create your own thing online or whatever. You had to work for a big company. And when the big company was done with you, maybe you could open up a wine shop or something. Right? But
Yeah,
that was
there
about
wasn't a
it.
there wasn't a whole lot to it, and now
Right.
there's so many different avenues people can go
Right.
down, so many different ways they can become an entrepreneur if they
Yep.
want to. I
Yep.
I would imagine I'll say most, a good portion of the people listening probably have ideas, like, "Oh, I
No.
thought about this," or "I thought about that," but then the cloudiness that you talked about, like, I call
Yeah.
that's just fear, right?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
fear getting in the way of not allowing you to explore that.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people who are like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a little cloudy," or "I'm afraid of taking that next step"? I would imagine even a high-ranking military person is afraid at some degree of going into something new that's in civilian life because he hasn't done it before.
Yeah. Yes. And we all are. And I think that is something that we need to recognize as human nature. And our ego is there and its role is to protect us reputationally. And it doesn't like it when we get out there and start trying to reinvent ourselves or do something different. So it will start chirping at us, telling us, well, it's fine to study and learn, but we're not going to actually do anything. That's ridiculous. That's not who we are, right? I don't know anything about that. No, well, let's stay here where everything's known, right? But then you contrast that with the deathbed question that is, We see it all the time. What are your regrets? And it's always not having the courage to do the thing you wanted to do, whatever that
Mm,
thing is.
yep.
And I think that's very real. And so that's where I think we try to people bring process and structure to this experience, is realizing there's a way to go through this where we come out the other side with a sense of not only motivation and enthusiasm and optimism, but also this clear vision of who we are and where we're going. And that to me is the secret ingredient of all this. When we are younger, we don't have any problem getting a vision of our future selves, right? We can see ourselves as parents. We can see ourselves in career levels that we aspire to. Maybe we see ourselves in a neighborhood we want to live in for the schools that our kids could go to, or any of those things, right? They're all tangible. And we see ourselves in that life and it pulls us forward. And then we get to this phase of life, and the culture is completely geared around winding it down.
Oh, absolutely.
Wind down.
You even get showcased retirement. This
Right.
stage, 15 or 20 years of this stage, so spot
So,
on. It's not
right.
modeled.
That's what they tell us to do, is now you're just chilling. And so now it's about experiences, right? And then the positive experiences are cruises and antiquing and running through amber waves of grain with the sunlight glinting off your silver hair, right? And the downside imaging is I've fallen and I can't get up, and stepless entry tubs and all of these ridiculous things we see when we've got the flu on Wednesday at 2 o'clock when we're watching TV, right? And these are the models we're given of aging in this country, and they're completely divorced from reality and what things can be. And so the first thing is we have to get clear on this future vision. It can't just be, I'm playing golf 3 days a week. It's fun, nothing wrong with it. It's part of what we want at this phase, is that freedom to do what we want to do when we want to do it. But there has to be an overarching drive, purpose, ambition that's pulling us forward, that we can see that future self down the road, that's compelling to us and it's pulling us into that future.
Yeah. Personally, I wanna be like Mary Lee. You're probably wondering, "Who's Mary Lee?" Mary Lee was a 74-year-old woman in our group of people who hiked Kilimanjaro,
Oh,
and
wow.
she absolutely crushed it, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"That's what I like, she's an example. I wanna be Mary Lee." And then I
Yeah.
saw a woman who was, like, 80, I think 80 or 84, somewhere in that range, walking the Camino in Spain. It's
Yeah.
like, anything is possible. Why do we wanna shut it down because society says you go, go, slow go, no go?
And that's what we all bought into. And this is if I'm sanctimonious about anything, it's rejecting this whole retirement mentality that we've had as a culture for over 100 years, or about 100 years, which came out of the Social Security Act. And that came out in 1935, and it was a safety net that's helped millions of people. So that in and of itself was a good thing. But they put an earnings test in it that forced older workers out. And back then, life expectancy was only 60 anyway. So, and the
Excellent point.
economy, yeah, and the economy was very heavily into manufacturing and agriculture, and it was physically demanding, and people smoked and drank, and they weren't in great shape. And so, yes, if you got to 60 or 65, you probably were worn out. You probably couldn't keep working, or if you were, you were clinging. And so that was designed to get older, tired workers out of the economy, bring in young, unemployed workers in the middle of the Great Depression. And it established this mentality in our culture that when I'm 65, I'm done with work. Now it's my time. But nobody ever defined what my time was. And as people began living longer, they began we began seeing this sort of inertia in this decline set in. And I'm not a scientist or physician. I can't speak with authority, but there's a lot of data that shows that the dementia epidemic we're seeing, at least in part, is from this extended atrophying that people are experiencing, that people just didn't live long enough to experience 50 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You need to use it or you lose it. Now, there's
Right.
some things that happen too with dementia that are beyond that
Right. And
control, right?
there's other aspects to it for
Yeah,
sure.
it's not just that, but it's like, how do you stay? fulfilled.
Right.
And I'm not saying that we work a career and that's always fulfilling every single minute of every day, but it does tie into your identity as who you are, whether you're a primary caregiver, whether you work outside the home, whatever it looks like.
Yep.
Your identity does get wrapped up to that. And we talked about that at the beginning of the show.
Yep.
And it's a process of unwinding your identity to even begin to talk about what comes next
Yes,
in
it
this
is.
next phase.
Right.
And so that's like step one is
Yep.
unwrapping your identity from who you were before
Yeah.
so that you can proceed. So how do you help people in that process? I know how I do it when I work with folks, but what's
Yep.
your approach?
Yeah, the term you're spot on. The term is enmeshment. I think that really nails it. It's when our identity and our work get wrapped up together, right?
Mhm.
Or it could be our identity and our parenting, right? But it's when external things become part of how we identify ourselves. Then it goes away and then we're disoriented. What we try to do is to take people at the very beginning through some assessments that we've done. Some are outside of what we've done, but like Clifton Strengths assessment, what I'm a big fan of. And it gets back to your core of who you are, right? What's that unique blend of your talents and your experience and your interests that comes together to make you who you are? And we think we know, and we do, and we think when we get to this age, it's like, I know me, I know my tendencies, but then you step back and you get an appreciation for what you really have to offer. And one of the things that I see consistently is that people undervalue this wisdom that they have and these capabilities and what they know. And I've seen some of the most profound coaching programs launched by people who've been cancer survivors or who've raised a special needs child and have learned so much the hard way.
Mm.
And there are people that are just going into that experience that are desperate for someone to help them through it and who's relatable and not just some expert from on high. And so sometimes those can make the best encore careers, and they're completely not adjacent to what people did in their first careers, right? And so I think that's part of what we try to do is help people get back to what makes you you beyond your career, and then what do you have to offer that the world really needs? And you get to decide that, and we can find ways to test it and see if the demand is there. But it comes down to redefining work. And work for so many of us in corporate America and professional life is very grindy with high burnout work, right? And so when people get to this age, a lot of times they don't want to hear the word work. It's the four-letter word. And so we really have to redefine that for this next phase into more of your life's work. And and I love to point to people that are high profile like the Rolling Stones, right? And Willie Nelson. And I was just watching a show the other night and there was a cameo by Mel Brooks, who's 99 and he's working on
He's
a
still
reboot
working.
of
Yep.
the producers,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that's not grindy have to work for these people, right? It's work they love to do. And yes, they're rich and famous, I get that, but if rich and famous was all there was, we wouldn't have the 27 Club, right? We wouldn't have all these tragic stories of people who died young, so it's because they feel like their work is their purpose and not just the have to work, so
Yeah,
that's the kind of work we wanna help our clients figure out and find in what we do at Encore Career Lab.
I love that. It's interesting that you brought up the Rolling Stones. They're the number one brought up example of what's possible. I don't know
Right.
why, maybe it's just our generation and
It
they were
seems
big
so
for us.
unlikely. It seems so unlikely Keith Richards would still be
Yep.
kicking at this phase, right?
Exactly, exactly, but this is like the 3rd time somebody's brought it up as an example. I'm like, "Well, there's something there to it."
Yeah,
You
yeah,
you talk a little bit about the wisdom approach, right? We have this amount of wisdom now, our wisdom brand, I think is what you
yep.
called it. Yeah, but oftentimes people say, "Well, I'll just volunteer or I'll mentor." Why is entrepreneurship so powerful instead?
Yeah, this is a really fundamental question that comes up a lot of times, and it's well intended. And I think what you find is that people that were really invested in their careers or in their work with their kids or whatever, when that goes away, presumably we're in a better financial situation than we were when we were younger. We have more capacity and we think, well, I can give more now. There's this, it's called generativity is the term. It was by Eric Erickson, the psychologist. And it's this compulsion we feel to give back as we get older. It's wired in us. And so I think that that's where we have to really look towards what's going to scratch that itch for us, right? How are we going to find ways to give back that are still in line with our values and our priorities and what's driving us at this point in life and not end up spinning our wheels doing things that seem like they'd be interesting, but that we don't feel really passionate about? Does that
Mhm.
I may have gotten off topic, so did I answer your
Oh,
question?
yeah, you're right there. Yeah, right on. Spot on with that. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think one that's been hopefully super powerful for people who will listen to this episode because it is such a good example of what's possible
No.
once the kids leave home. And before I let you go, I'm just curious, what's one thing you've learned about yourself in developing and creating Encore Career Lab and your journey?
It really lights me up seeing what people have to offer and seeing them discover that. And it's there's a variation of that from wealth management, but it's not exactly the same. And the people that come into the program have so much potential and they don't appreciate it. They don't see it. A lot of times they're humble people and they underestimate themselves. So it's really energizing to me to see them start to get excited about that because the downstream effects, the butterfly effect, you never know
Oh, yeah, the
where that's
ripples
gonna
of
go, right?
ripples are out there, and
Yeah,
who knows if you inspire somebody else,
just
right?
one person, who knows? Who knows? That might be the one person that changes the world, right?
That's right. I believe that 100%. Impact
Yeah,
1 or impact 1,000,000, there's no difference.
yeah,
Impact is impact, and when the kids leave home, I think we can still impact the lives of others, just not our
yeah,
kids.
yeah, absolutely.
Jack, thank you so much for being here today. The conversation was fantastic, and I look forward to seeing how Encore Career Lab continues to grow and shine a light on what's possible for folks.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate the invitation. It's been great being on, and I love what you're doing, so keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.